a green conference.
This meeting is being recorded.
It could have been advertised as a green conference because think of how much energy we're saving by not, driving to FIU campus and all doing this from the comfort of our own offices. So while we do lose the luxury of cordiality of being together, there is something to be said for the what we are doing to save energy. And I want to also thank Mr. Scott for his service to our country.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from our friend Marisol Zentano with an introduction. And again, we'll go back through and have our panelists talk a little bit more about their role. So Marisol, who wears many hats, but with the League of Women Voters here today. But go ahead and give a fuller introduction, please.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sean. And thank you, ASPA South Florida, for hosting this conference and for inviting me and the League of Women Voters as the community organization. I am grateful for Supervisor Christina White and Mr. Joe Scott for being here. And of course, you, Howard Rosen. The League of Women Voters, we have a very close relationship with Supervisor White. She is amazing and has done so well for our county and our our elections. I am currently the first vice president for the League of Women Voters Florida, after serving as the League of Women Voters Miami-Dade president for 2 years. Like Sean said, I do wear a couple of hats. I am also employed at the Office of the Property Appraiser in Miami-Dade County. I've been there 6 years. Prior to that, I was in the private sector for almost 20 years as a state general property appraiser. And but switching to the public sector has been an amazing experience, and that I've learned the love of my community and the importance of being engaged in our community. That's why I am so grateful for ASPA having this type of conferences. Public sector employees, a lot of times we're not recognized for all the work and how we are, the infrastructure actually, for everything happening in the county. I'm so glad to be here, and my volunteer organization, the League of Women Voters, does take so much time and effort, but it is so important because in these very trying times, the voter engagement, voter participation, it's so important because, as we know, everything depends on the vote. All our elected officials, all the policies and regulations lie on them, and we count on informing voters about what's at stake for them. My other hat is I am currently an adjunct professor at Florida International University, where I graduated a few years ago with my master's in public administration, and I am so glad to be teaching an online course, Managing Global Cities, with Dr. Amanda Clark, who is facilitating this event also. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thank you, Marisol. And I think we got the recording figured out. There's nothing other than that a couple of people were working at the same time trying to get all the sessions recorded. So Amanda is monitoring that, but the reason it went on and off was accidental, nothing else. So we're on the record, we're recording. Want to hear from our panelists again one time through, and then really open it up for your questions and comments. But so let me go back to Supervisor White and Christina. Since you've been in the office since you've been the supervisor 6 years, and you were in the office before that, I'm wondering best practices, what sort of changes you may have implemented in the office upon becoming supervisor, and along with that, as there are changes in state law year to year, how do those changes impact what your office needs to do to keep up and be election ready and to maintain the integrity of our elections here in Miami-Dade County and in Broward County?
Well, that's a lot to unpack, Sean. I can talk to you all about this for days and days, probably. So I'll try to condense it all into 10 short minutes. I guess I'll start off by saying that our mission here is a lofty one, and it's to instill trust and confidence by conducting elections that are fair, accurate, transparent, and accessible for all voters of Miami-Dade County. And we recently modified our mission statement to add that trust and confidence piece in there, because I have found that in recent years that is becoming more and more important, right? As we're all just being flooded with misinformation and disinformation are sort of the keywords that are thrown out there right now, because there is just so much of it out there. And so, that trust piece is important to us. And, I'm proud to say that we have been able to gain the trust of voters here in this county over the last many years, conducting elections that people can feel proud of. But there's a lot that goes into achieving all of that, right? And I think making it convenient is probably the biggest one, making sure that voters have a very, it's very accessible to them, that our policies and procedures are open and transparent. We really pride ourselves on that here. Anybody that wants to come and do a tour of our building or ask us how and why we do certain things, we're very open about that. And I think that goes a very, very long way. It's probably one of my best practices, right? To make sure that people know what's happening here. It's no mystery. We are an open book. If you want to know about it, we're happy to discuss it with you. Making sure that our results are accurate and they're verified, and that results are timely on election night. And that's really just to name a few. There's really so much. So after every election, my staff and I debrief about the election, what we can do better, what lessons we have learned, because there's always a different dynamic. Who could have anticipated COVID? Nobody. But, we were required to adjust and adapt quite quickly, and we did that. And so, that is one of our best practices, to always take what we've learned in an election and apply that in the future. So many practices, but to sort of hone in on a few, one that's important to, I think, everybody, is that every single thing that we do here is in 3 languages: English, Spanish, and Creole. We want to make sure that we are serving all of our communities and our populations equally. And that includes everything from voter information prior to the election, the actual ballot itself, instructions in the polls, our sample ballot. And then that's even more recently extended to everything on our website, all of our social media posts. Everything is in the 3 languages, so that people feel like we are reaching them in the language that is preferred. Of course, in the state of Florida, not unique to Miami-Dade, but there are 3 ways to vote. So in my view, it's never been more accessible. And, you talked earlier about so many elections happening all the time for both of our counties. It's sort of a funny thing that we say, if it's Tuesday, it's election day. And it's true, because we're constantly having either municipal elections or special elections. But unfortunately, the voter turnout in those elections are nowhere near what it is in a countywide election. But, we try to educate and make sure that our voters know about all of them equally. And we just hope that, participation will continue to grow in our municipal elections. So, I know I only have 10 minutes, but, I want to sort of hit the 3 methods of voting and, what our best practices are in those. And hopefully, our voters who are on the line walk away, a little more educated. So in the state of Florida, vote by mail is called it's called referred to anyway as the no excuse vote by mail process. It's that simple. If you want to vote by mail, all you have to do is ask for one. And, returning that ballot is also never been easier. You can put it in the mail. You can drop it off at my office, or now at all of our early voting locations, we have what's called the drop box. 162,000 people in the presidential election took advantage of that. And it was what I'm told to be the perfect blend of voting methods, because you get the ballot at home, you can take your time with it, do your research. And if you're uncomfortable putting it in the mail stream, you can drop it off at an early voting site in one of our boxes that has one of my staff members there. You get the I voted sticker. So that has been amazing. We'll continue to do that in all future elections. And I definitely want to recommend that as an option for our voters going into the future, because it really is, the sort of the perfect blend of voting at home and in person. One thing that you do have to know about vote by mail is you have to sign the envelope. And I always do a little show and tell when I talk about vote by mail, because if you don't sign the ballot, we cannot accept it. This is how we know that it is you that voted that ballot. Lots of questions about signatures and are we accepting ballots we shouldn't, or are we throwing signatures out that we should be accepting? I think people really have a lot of questions about that. And so one of the best practices that I always like to talk about in these forums is that my staff goes through forensic signature training. We have a trainer that comes on site. They do a thorough training with my staff. My staff takes a test. Only those people who pass that are actually able to perform this function. So we know when we're accepting a ballot or rejecting a ballot, that in the end, only the canvassing board can do, not my staff. It is because that signature does match or it does not match. So I want to, really have people walk away from this conversation being confident about that. Another good best practice with vote by mail, as I said, you have to sign it. If you don't sign it, if you forget, or if we find that your signature doesn't match, we will notify you in advance to give you an opportunity to correct it. That's a state law. That's going to be everywhere. So if you get a communication from us, please act on that. We'll call you, we'll text you, we'll email you, we'll mail you something to your home. We'll do all the above. That's our best practice, to try to reach you to correct it. So on that note, the earlier you give us your ballot, the more time you'll have to correct it. Moving on to early voting, always in a countywide election, we are going to offer the maximum number of days and the maximum number of hours in a general election, I should say, on the hours for our voters to take advantage of early voting. That's become a very, very popular way of voting. We also offer what we consider to be the right number of early voting sites for that particular election. So 23 early voting sites during primary elections, and then we grow to 28 in a gubernatorial, and then we grow to 33 in a general. And that is all because we know that the number of people that are going to be coming out to vote requires those additional sites. And that's really goes back to the convenience factor for our voters. Another great best practice there is that we do track and post our wait times for all of our early voting sites. And so, very often when people are waiting in line, it's almost in a way because they've chosen to go to a particular site. Because you may have, a 30-minute wait at one of our very, very popular sites, and you can walk in and out to one of the sites that's, just a couple miles away. And so I always recommend that voters go onto our website, look at the wait times, and make an informed decision about where it is that they go vote, not necessarily go to where they always go, because you can have a very different, experience, and that's your choice. Election day, our precincts are located. Our goal anyway is to locate our precincts no more than 2 miles from any voter's home, because if you've waited until election day, this is your last opportunity. There were many options before that, which I will always recommend you take advantage of. But if you wait until election day, it's only your precinct. And so we really try to make it as accessible as possible, and keeping that precinct as close to your home as we can. Very proud about our poll worker certification program. This is a program that we put our supervisory level poll workers through. It's an additional training. We certify them, and it gives us, the person working, and also our voters, the confidence that the people that are leading these precincts really understand the election laws and the procedures, and they're going to be carried out properly. And then also, I'm very, very fortunate that I have the support of other county departments, and we use a lot of county employees out there, and it's one more level or layer rather of supervisory eyes and ears for us out in the field to make sure that things are working well, and anything that needs to be communicated back here to the department is seamlessly. I know I'm sort of rambling on. I have so many to go over. I think probably the last one that I'll mention is just very, very proud of the achievements that we've made in line management. We've put a lot of math, a lot of studies to the perfect equipment allocation out in the field for the number of people that we are expecting in a particular location. So it's a queuing theory. So in other words, it means if I know that 1,000 people are going to come and my ballot is 4 pages long, they're going to spend a certain amount of time at each one of those stations. So how much equipment do I need in order to facilitate the lines? And we've been doing that since 2014, and it's been working quite well. And we are able to achieve our goal that no voter waits in line more than 1 hour. So that is definitely one of the proudest of our best practices that I'll share with you today. And I think I'll stop there because I think I covered a lot.
You definitely did, and we appreciate that. Does anyone have a question or comment related to what Supervisor White said now? So I have one, and then we'll sort of try to flow through, and if you can stick around, you might have some later. But I'm wondering, do the canvassing board members get trained in signature verification as well?
Yes, they do.
Yes. And do you really check every signature on the ballots that come in? Every ballot gets viewed with eyes?
Every single ballot. Yes, there's lots of misconceptions about the process. Every ballot that comes in, the signature on the ballot is compared to every signature that we have on record for you, to try to make a comparison, because maybe one time you did just your initials, the other time you wrote your entire name out. And so, our job is to accept ballots, not to reject them. So every ballot is reviewed, and we look at as many signatures that we have on file for you as possible.
Okay, very interesting. How do you do signature verification training? How many hours of that does someone do?
Oh, it's a day's training, and it's every single time. So my employees are doing this repeatedly, and we hire an expert, a forensic signature expert, who is often called in court proceedings, and they go through their training with us, and we're comparing signatures, and they teach us how to compare like the flow of a signature, how a pen leans, the resting pen mark. There's lots of indicators in there that you can look into deeper to see if it's the same person doing it or not. And so that training occurs. And then, like I said, there's a test where you have to actually match the signatures and say whether or not they match or don't match. And then only upon passing that are you able to perform that function. And everybody in the process gets that training.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's really, I think most people don't know that. I think that would be important to know. And probably not every county works that way as well, I might suggest.
There may be a not exactly the way that we do it, but every county is doing signature training for the people that are doing this job, to my knowledge.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So any other questions or comments for Christina now? Julio.
There's a question in the chat, I think, as to whether the signature is matched with Department of Motor Vehicle Records, Tina.
Is it matched to that? Well, I'm sorry, was the question, are we matching it to what's on file with the DMV?
Asking, I think.
They were asking if you match with DMV, but you had answered you match with any and every signature on file.
That we have on file, right? If we have your signature from the DMV, then yes, that would be one of the source signatures.
Julio, you have a question?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the insight and, the mention of transparency. It's so important. I was wondering, do you all have like any types of campaigns or to put out this information in the mail and just let the public know, everyone know, prior to election season, maybe like a mail out campaigns is something that you do, or so through social media, just showing the transparency in the process so that everybody's educated and really aware of everything that goes behind and all the efforts behind this process and how it works.
We try to do the best that we can, right? Our reach never seems to be far enough, but yes, we have a multi-pronged approach on all of our campaigns. We do a direct mail prior to each election through what we call the sample ballot, which is a wealth of information. It does go into the signature requirement part. And so we do social media, we do the direct mailing, I'm constantly trying to do these types of forums. We go on the radio, on TV. So, we do try to educate as much as possible. One of my goals in 2022 is to do more videos, because I think that really is going to show people sort of the behind the scenes of the department. And I think that that'll go a long way. So those will be coming soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. There's another good question in the chat about resource allocation, but I think I'd like to go ahead and move to Supervisor Scott to get him in here and our other speakers, and then hopefully we can get that question answered at some point about resource allocation. All right.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to jump on that.
Perfect.
I get
Thanks.
I get to follow Supervisor White here, and she's been doing this for many years, and she covered a lot. So I'm going to try not to go back over what she talked about. But one thing, since we've been talking about the signature, there's one thing I want to mention, that a lot of people have this impression that the process is more ad hoc than it is, that maybe we're just getting them in and we're kind of looking at the signatures on file versus what's on the envelope. So just to explain a little bit more what happens, we have this, a big machine that's called a sorter that actually helps us sort all of our mail when it comes in. And that machine actually captures the image of the signature right on the envelope. So it's actually done through our system, which is a system that all the supervisors in the state of Florida are using. So that system, actually, we're capturing the image, and then we're looking at the signatures that are on file on the computer screen, along with the signature on the envelope. So we're actually looking at it on the computer screen, comparing them side by side, and then clicking in the system to say whether or not it's approved or not. And the ones that don't get approved, there's then a notification that goes out to the voter that let them know that they need to fix it. And then all of them go back through the sorter again, and the ones that were rejected get split out and separated. And those envelopes are never opened unless they actually get fixed. So only the envelopes that got approved go on to the next step of actually being opened and counted. So it's a very, solid process. It's a lot more professional than most people expect. And one thing I'm actually looking forward to is the new building that we're moving into is going to allow us to have a little bit more transparency, where we're able to bring people on, more tours and show people how it all works. Because as Christina mentioned, there's a problem right now of people not having confidence in the election process. And, we want to make sure that we build that confidence with the public and let them know that, hey, this is a professional process. Like, we're not just, this isn't something that that we're just making it up as we go. These are very, the procedures and processes that are in place have been refined and calibrated over time to make it even better and better. So that's my piece on the signature side. As far as getting back to the overall topic here, which has to do with how we kind of, I would say, how we keep up with the times, and I realize we have a room full of future public administrators in the room, and to help you all understand the challenges that you're going to face, when you get out of college and when you're actually, out there in the workplace, as a government agency, and especially doing elections, we have to communicate with a lot of people. And I'd say that's the biggest challenge, because the landscape when it comes to communicating with the public is changing so quickly right now. So as opposed to the way that we actually process ballots when it comes through, although that process is constantly changing, constantly getting tweaked. They're up in Tallahassee right now working on some new laws to change the system for us. We're on the communication side of how we communicate with the public. That's a whole nother challenge, because it's changing so fast. And, we have all these there's always new social media platforms coming online that are popular, so we start getting used to something like, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, But now we've got a whole group of voters that are not using Facebook and Twitter. They're on Twitch and they're on TikTok. And, and if we want to communicate with those people, we have to try to make sure that we understand where the attention is and make sure that we're getting our information in front of people where their attention is. And that's what I would say is one of our big challenges, and one of the things that I'm really trying to shape my part of my team that I have that handles communications, of really, making sure that we have people who understand that changing landscape and are jumping on top of, what do we need to do for the next election cycle to make sure that we're reaching all the voters that we can. And so we want to, make sure that we're, focused on those people, that 18 to 25 group that might be on Twitch and TikTok, but we don't want to forget about the baby boomers who are still out there and who, want to get something in the mail, and they're looking at, they're looking in their mailbox, and we want to make sure that we're communicating all the way across the board. People who are watching television, we want to make sure we're reaching them. People who are streaming their TV shows, there's a different way of reaching those people. So, I think that's the element, that's one of the big challenges that we're working on and that we have to face. So that's the communication side. And why is communications important? It's important for just certain things in terms of making sure that people are aware that, hey, there's an election coming up. We just did, we had 2 special elections that just passed, and we have one more that's coming up on March 8th. And, one of the criticisms that I'm getting that really bites at me is when people tell me, I didn't know there was an election. Why, you guys aren't doing enough to let people know there's an election. And it's like, oh my goodness, we feel like we're doing so much, but it's like, no matter what we do, it seems like it's never enough. Like we always have to do more and more and more to try to get the word out to the public. So we want to make sure that people are communicated to for when they know an election's coming up. They need to know that there's deadlines for certain things. In the state of Florida, you have to be registered to vote 29 days before the election. So we need to make sure people know, hey, there's an election coming up. And hey, if you're not registered, you need to be registered 29 days before. If you want to vote by mail, there's deadlines for that as well. We need to, make sure that people are requesting their vote by mail ballots in time, getting it to them, and then getting it back in the mail. That vote by mail ballot actually has to reach us before the polls close on election night. So by 7 p.m. on election night, the ballot has to be in our possession. So it's not good enough to go and drop it in the mailbox or deliver it to the post office on election day. That's not going to get to us. And so these are all things that have to be continuously communicated to the public every time there's an election. And that's what, that's where the challenge is for us on the communication side. So then there comes the other side of it, which is actually administering the election and actually how we run it and how we deal with the inevitable, what I would say, what's going to come after the election, which is that, everybody who's running for office, people are running for office, they're working their butts off to try to get as many votes as they can. And oftentimes they feel as if they're doing better than they really are, because everybody maybe is telling them, oh, we support you, we're going to vote for you. But then it's a secret ballot, so we don't know who they're voting for. So then people get surprised when the results come out and they think they were doing better than they were, and they're upset now. So we know that's going to happen. And that's part of the reason that the systems have been refined so much over time, is because candidates being angry at the outcome of an election is nothing new. That's been happening for a long time. And we know that we need to be prepared to show, here's how we conducted the election. Here's how we know the results are accurate. And we put all the systems that we set up so that we can walk somebody through. I just had an election that was decided by 5 votes in Broward County. And the next morning after the election, elections are almost always on a Tuesday. And Wednesday morning, I show up to the office, and, the candidates, one of the candidates people were standing there waiting on me, like an attorney and a family member of the candidate were waiting for me when I showed up. And it was great that I just walked them in the building and I took them on a tour. And I showed them how everything works and how we did everything because they wanted to know everything. One of the things that they were watching was how the lead changed during the night. So it was like early on they were ahead, and then later in the evening they weren't ahead, and it was very close. And they wanted to know exactly what happened, how we did everything. And it was great to be able to just kind of walk them through and show them how the process is set up. And then throughout the process, we had to go through a recount and everything just to kind of make sure, recounts are done because when it's very, very close, we want to just double check. We want to count all the ballots again and make sure that they're right. One of the great systems that we recently put in place here in Broward County in most recent years was a system called Clear Ballot. So what this is, and the reason it's so great, is that it's a separate, so basically when we go to take the ballots, we actually scan those ballots in, and then there's a system that's called a tabulation system that then counts all the votes for us. And, there's people out there might have conspiracy theories and think that maybe it's getting hacked or this or that. We don't know if the process isn't working the right way. So one of the great things that we're doing now is that we go to a separate scanner, a separate system that's on a separate server, and everything is separate, and we scan the ballots a second time. And then we get a second set of results. So you literally have two different systems that are completely separated in every way, and you're checking the ballots against each other. And that's one of the things that just really makes it easy, something that we can show people that just, hopefully that just becomes the definitive, hey, we know this is right. We know the results are accurate because it's not just coming from this one system. We actually have a second system where we're double checking, in a completely independent way to make sure that everything is right. So it's this constant struggle and constant update, on the front end of making sure we're getting the information out to everybody, but then on the back end of making sure that all of our processes are so solid that we don't have to worry about anybody coming back to us a little bit later and saying, hey, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. How do you know these results are accurate? How do you know you didn't get it wrong? And just, we have to do all these things. We have to check, double check, and have all these processes as solid as possible. And I feel like that's one of the things, especially here in Florida, that we've all done very, very well. We coordinate well with our Miami-Dade partners. Miami-Dade partners coordinate with us. Sometimes their staff will come up and see what we're doing. My staff will go down there and see what they're doing. We have meetings where we get together and talk about what we're doing to make things better in our own counties. We do a lot of work to make sure we get it right and to make sure that we're staying on top of things.
Thank you very much. That is invaluable information, I think. And, some of us on this call know this stuff and follow this stuff, but I think the general public really needs to know more. And I do, when I tell people, I say our supervisors of elections and our elections departments in these two counties do a fabulous job of communicating with the public. But you have to convince others that that's the case because they want to see it the way they want to see it. But you've got the practices in place, even with all the difficulties that you have in administering large county elections and changing state laws. So look, I know we have some really good questions in the chat, some amazing questions. But I think what we ought to do is go ahead to Mr. Rosen and also hear from Marisol. And then if people would like to ask their questions, we'll do that with the remaining time. I don't want to run out of time, but I'm aware of those questions and maybe people can follow up individually on some of them. But right now, let's go ahead to Howard Rosen and hear a little bit about how they deal with it in the state attorney's office in investigations and prosecutions of election irregularities.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Obviously voting is one of the most sacred rights and privileges that we have as citizens. I like to say along with that comes the obligation of coming and serving on a jury, which is near and dear to my heart as well. But Ms. Rundle, your elected state attorney, and I, as her chief assistant, really believe that we have to all be diligent in protecting our individual rights as voters. Our right to vote and the voting process should always be free from any interference from anybody and any misconduct. So we want every citizen to come away with a level of comfort, to be secure in knowing that their state attorney's office protects their rights as a Miami-Dade County voter. And we do a lot of things, to do that a lot of other prosecutors' offices do not do. We really do have a long tradition here in Dade County of investigating and prosecuting cases of voter fraud and election fraud. We've done dozens of these cases over the years. For everyone that you're hearing about in the newspaper, there's probably been half a dozen that we looked at and we weren't able to substantiate anything with it. And it never, it never, gets out there in the media. Like I said, I've been with the office for 36 years and I was personally involved in several of them, going back to, I don't know, any of you remember in 1997, the city Miami mayoral election. So there was a city commissioner at the time who was involved in actually there was a very large contingency of what was then referred to as absentee ballots, but now known as mail-in ballots. And there was actually a city commissioner that was involved in it. We prosecuted him. He was convicted. He went to jail. That investigation and prosecution ended up overturning the entire city of Miami mayoral race. The courts overturned the entire election as a result of it. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to speak today about any pending cases or any ongoing investigations, but you need to only open the newspaper, open the Herald, or log on to any social media or turn on a television, and you'll see what we're involved in, right? That we currently have a prosecution that's arising out of a propped up candidate for a state Senate seat who was paid to run, right? But that's pending in our one of our Senate districts down here. There's tentacles of that are still being looked at. That's been publicly reported. Recently in Sofkey Towers here in Miami-Dade County, there were a number of people whose party affiliation was changed. And that's something else that we're looking at right now, very intently. Yeah, and something like that is something that, when we talk about, we all have an obligation to protect our vote. We in law enforcement, prosecutors and law enforcement, yeah, we can help once a crime has been committed. But the best advice that we like to give people is guard your vote, but guard your vote carefully. Guard your vote like you would guard your credit card. Okay, because if people are coming to you and saying, listen, fill out this form. If you fill out this form, you're going to have better representation, in Tallahassee. Or if you fill out this form, you're going to have better representation on the Board of County Commissioners or on your city. And you're not looking at what you're signing, and you're signing a form that's really going to change your party affiliation or something of that nature. That's not good. So you need to really, really be careful when people are approaching. And there are bad actors out there. There's a lot of bad actors out there. We see them. And people really need to be careful in protecting, their own ballot. We are pretty aggressive here in Miami-Dade County on the matters. In order to prosecute a case, what we have to do is, we do an investigation. And I'm going to get into a little bit of where our tips come from and, who does these investigations. But we have to rely upon the facts that we discover and those facts that we're able to discover, and then we apply the law that the current law, and the laws change of the current law to those facts. And sometimes we can prosecute, and sometimes we can't. So our complaints come in from everywhere. We do have a voter fraud hotline, and our number is, I'm going to give it to everybody. It's 305-547-3300. Again, 305-547-3300. And we activate that during election cycles. I don't know if it's activated at this moment in time or not. But whenever there's an active election, it is activated, and we have people manning it 24/7. And we follow up with every single call that we get on there. Some of them allege, irregularities, and a lot of them, we just send them over to Ms. White's office because, they'll have questions about, we literally get calls on our hotline for, where's my closest precinct, or I haven't gotten my ballot that I requested, or whatever the case may be. but we do get, some pretty significant tips as well. We have a public corruption unit here in our office. And inside of our public corruption unit, we have a public corruption task force. And that task force is made up of individuals from numerous police departments, okay? We have people from some of our local departments, our county police department, and they make up the task force. And that way, it's kind of blended and balanced so that there's no allegation that, well, this was an election in the city of Sunny Isles, and you should not have Sunny Isles police officers looking at it. So no, we have a blended task force so that they look at all the allegations that come in from wherever it may come in. And I want to kind of let you know what our burden of proof is in a criminal investigation. Okay, some may say, well, if you think that something might have happened, why don't you just arrest them and prosecute them and let a jury decide? So, we are held to a standard in the criminal law that is the highest standard that there is, which is beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. So before we file an information, which is a charging document, the rules of criminal procedure, rule 3.131B, specifically says, before filing an information, every state attorney should determine the possibility of proving the case beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt. If that cannot be accomplished, no information should be filed and the defendant should be released. So there may be probable cause to make an arrest on a matter, right? But there may not necessarily be enough evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, in most of these election cases, we work with our partners, we work with all the various law enforcement agencies, and it's very unusual for them to make an arrest and then we don't prosecute it. We usually work with them from the beginning, and if there is sufficient evidence, then there is an arrest and a prosecution. And if there's not sufficient evidence, there is no arrest and there is no prosecution. That's also been laid out in the United States Supreme Court in a decision going back to the 1970s that says that fundamental conceptions of justice require that prosecutors, before they're satisfied they'll be able to establish a suspect's guilt, if we only filed charges based upon a reasonable doubt, that would have a deleterious effect on the rights of the accused and upon the ability of society to protect itself. So our burden is pretty high in all criminal cases. So that's why sometimes you'll read about an allegation out there, and we're just not able to prosecute the case. But we have prosecuted dozens and dozens of election cases, over the past couple of decades. We also have to be cognizant of where a complaint is coming from, and like Mr. Scott said, losing parties are not happy. And what happens is sometimes parties will get very proactive even prior to the election taking place. And it is not unheard of for us to get an allegation. So you'll have candidate A and candidate B running for city commission against each other in city commission or village council or fill in the blank jurisdiction. And candidate A will call us and they will make an allegation against candidate B. And in the past, we have sometimes publicly acknowledged that now we have this investigation of candidate B. And then candidate A goes out there and says, my opponent is under investigation by the state attorney's office. So as a result of that, we're really, really careful in what we do in the weeks and days that are leading up to an election. We need to be sensitive in that. We don't want to affect an election by something that we're going to do. The federal government has a specific time period around an election that they don't get involved at all in anything that's going to affect that election. And we try to kind of do the same thing. Especially, as mainstream media and social media and electronic media have progressed to the point that they are now. Somebody puts one tweet out there and all of a sudden it goes viral, and then all of a sudden it's a given fact. And you'll have a candidate saying, hey, my opponent has committed voter fraud, and the state attorney's office is looking at it. And that can really, really affect an election. And it very well may be that the allegation they gave us is true, but perhaps it's not. And we've had a few situations where that has been the case. So we really do need to be cognizant of something like that. And the other thing that we have to do is we have to always be aware of the new laws that are coming into play, because, you know, as both supervisors, you know, Ms. White and Mr. Scott said, the laws are constantly changing. I mean, you know, session is in right now in Tallahassee, and there are several, you know, legislative changes that people are pushing, you know, for various reasons. And so we have to be aware of what the laws are. And I'll give you an example. Once upon a time, when we did the absentee ballot case in 1997 in the city of Miami, and when we've done other cases like that, there was really no law against somebody having possession of numerous absentee ballots. And people would do what we refer to as harvesting, and they would go out and collect absentee ballots from people and drive them into the supervisor of elections, drop them in the mailbox, whatever they would do with them, right? You could have people in possession of dozens or hundreds of them, and we've had those cases over the years. So our Board of County Commission in Miami-Dade County passed section 12-14 of the Miami-Dade County Code, and that was passed, when was it passed? Let me see. Within the last 10 years, I think. Tina, do you remember exactly when that was? That dealt with two ballots or more?
The ordinance was passed in 98, but then penalties were added in 2011.
Okay, so it became criminal in 2011. And specifically what it says, and the criminal penalties are $1,000 fine and 60 days in jail. And what it says is that a person may not pick up or return more than 2 absentee ballots other than his or her own per election, only if one of which may be for someone other than one's immediate family. So that means I cannot bring in to the elections department or even drop off in the mailbox, you know, 2 ballots that are not mine, you know, and not my family members. So think about that. So, you know, I have an elderly family that, you know, elderly couple that lives next door to me, and you know, they're not able to get around. And so election time, they knock on my door and they say to me, Mr. Rosen, would you please take our, you know, our 2 ballots and our disabled son's ballot and drop them off in the post office for us, you know, to mail. And they're sealed, and I don't do anything with them, but they're sealed. I'm in violation of that ordinance if I do that. So that's a pretty strict ordinance, but a necessary ordinance, right? A necessary ordinance. And of course, you know, we have to have some discretion in who we're going to prosecute based upon the facts that we find. You know, if those are the facts that we find, you know, that was an elderly family, and you know, they were asking a neighbor just to drop it off, that's a case that we probably would not necessarily prosecute. It may have been a violation of the law, but we would probably defer prosecution in a matter like that. On the other hand, if it's somebody working for a candidate who's going around collecting, you know, ballots, that's a completely different story. And then and so the county ordinance passed, but there was no state law that would say the same thing. There was no state law against it. And then in I think it was 2014, state law came into existence, which did the same thing. And it says that any person who collects, delivers, or otherwise physically possesses more than 2 vote-by-mail ballots per election, in addition to his or her own, commits a misdemeanor of the 1st degree. Again, $1,000 fine or 60 days in jail, and 60 days in jail. The Florida statute is actually 1 vote more forgiving, in that it allows someone to possess 2 absentee ballots of someone other than a family member, and the county ordinance does not. It does not. So you know, you're all seeing that right now. The governor is proposing an Office of Election Crimes and Security. That you know is the proposal is to have almost 50 investigators to investigate voter fraud statewide, and it's Senate Bill 524. Perhaps it's necessary in some jurisdictions in Florida. I'm sure that there's a lot of counties that have never investigated or prosecuted a voter fraud case or an elections case, so that may be necessary. But again, we do prosecute these cases in Miami-Dade County pretty vigorously. Like I said, we have, you know, a public corruption task force right here in our shop. We work very closely with Ms. White's office. We're constantly harassing her and calling her and asking her for things and subpoenaing records, and you know, we're pretty vigorous with it. And, again, it's because voting is such an important right, and just is one not to be tampered with. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosen. I think the way these conferences go is we could hear from each speaker for the whole hour. And I know myself, I have many questions for each of them, but I'm going to hold off so that we can hear from Marisol and then open it up to questions. Hopefully we can get to some of these issues that people have that they want to raise, put them in the chat so that we can make sure that we have them addressed. So Marisol, with that, I'm going to give you the floor. Go for it.
Sure, thank you. This is, I wish also all the participants would have been in this session because it's so important listening from the supervisors of elections and the state attorney's office that we can hear what's actually happening and what's actually being done to protect the people's votes. As a community organization, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization of over 100 years old, the League of Women Voters, we work arduously and constantly to bring out the vote, to protect democracy and defend voting rights. I'm really glad everything that has been said, but from the other side, in terms of community activism, it's a real challenge to bring out people to vote, to educate them and inform them about the importance of their votes and why their vote matters. More importantly, and increasingly, unfortunately, we are seeing voter apathy because of many of the same issues that had been addressed today. In terms of as a community organization, what we are seeing is more pressure in what seems to be suppressing voting rights, the suppression of voters, minority voters throughout the state, and making it more difficult for organizations like us. Right now, well, last year, the legislature passed and Governor DeSantis signed Senate Bill 90 that was widely opposed by all supervisors of election because of all the restrictions that it put in. And our organization is actively suing the state because of this. It has placed more tasks for us in terms of our volunteers and the concerns about this and everything that we have to do extra that we didn't have to do before. We are a premier organization, and now under that law, we have to put in a sign and let voter registrants that their petition may not be filed in time, that we may not get it in time, when we have always done very well with this. The League of Women Voters is suing our state president, just testified, and we're waiting on the results of this litigation. On top of that, Senate Bill 90 also put limits on early voting boxes that we believe is going to restrict even further the voters. And unfortunately, everyone, along with this is just the sentiment of the voters, that seeing how it seems like, why are we voting? If, I was one of the people asking for petitions during Amendment 4, we heard Angel earlier to have it passed with unprecedented amount across statewide, and then the legislature changing it around, that it was not the voters' intent, and that was not what we understood. So more and more, then same thing with so many other bills. We see that people, especially, like I said, African American and Hispanic communities, just wondering, is like, what am I voting for? if once it gets to the legislature, is going to change. In addition to that, all the restrictions being placed on our organization are volunteers themselves. Even though we had COVID these last 2 years after Senate Bill 90, a lot of people we are fully volunteered. We have no staff, and our members are concerned about registering voters, that either the organization may get penalized for up to $500 or $1,000, depending on the situation. So this just creates infringements on us. And, so much so that now when we register voters, we have the disclaimer on a chart, and we would rather have them just do a scan and go directly to the supervisors of elections website. Unfortunately, when you do this, a lot of times people are doing it from their cell phones, and the website is not doing it properly. So much for that voter registration. We've had people actually say, it's like, oh no, well, we won't do it now. We won't fill out the papers. And then also in terms of election fraud, as Mr. Rosen very well mentioned, a lot of times people are filling out the papers and they think that is honest people filling it out. But when you fill out the paper application, you can actually see, somebody can actually go and check a box. So while the voter was just changing their address or changing their signature, which we always recommend because their signatures change throughout time, somebody else can come in and check the box differently. So I'm glad this is being investigated. Along with that, the voter turnout throughout municipal and local elections is always worrisome. I appreciate Christina White's office because they're always very much on top of letting voters, the League of Women Voters is always sending out alerts to remind everybody about voting and getting their vote by mail sent in. That's another thing with SB 90. The time to send in your vote by mail right now, the legislation, there's one that you're going to have to put in 3 different envelopes to be able to cast your vote by mail. If you don't do it in the right sequence, in the right place, your vote may not count. So it's like, if it's just really, really confusing. And this is something that as organization, it always hurts me because we work so hard. We work so hard to get voters out to vote and be informed about who are they voting off for or the issues. We give out so much information, and yet when it's time to vote, they feel discouraged. So we are always concerned about these type of things and legislations happening, even though even supervisors of elections, the community, we're all speaking out. Florida had amazing results and timely results. We had no issues, and yet all these impositions are being placed on us. So it's really discouraging to continue on this work. We do know that we have to continue it because if not, one of our things is that the defense of democracy. We are trying to hold the line and making it helping voters because, as we always say, if only a few people are the ones voting, that's only the representation that you have. So we are constantly trying to get more voters out to vote, and not just that, but for them to be informed. The other thing with registering voters is that, they have to make sure that either they have their driver's license or the last 4 of their social. We know that some people may not have a driver's license. Some people are hesitant about putting the last 4 of their social. Elderly voters thinking, your signature changes throughout their time. And yes, the supervisor of elections have different ways to check it. But, you know, it's like if you have some neurological disease or something that is different, that always causes problems. We also want to make sure that the voters are very well informed. We host candidate forums for people to know, to be aware of what their candidates stand for, and that it aligns with their views. There's so much to go on, but in terms of you know, the community organizations, we just want to be partners with the supervisors of elections and with all the elections officials to provide fair and accurate information for the constituents to be, and have people that represent them, for them to know that their vote does count, even with all the mishaps and the apathy. Their vote does count, and that it is sacred and is something that needs to be regarded. And we need elected officials to really lobby for the voters to know that their votes are the ones that impact, and that their vote is, you know, has everything to do with everything that happens with them. You know, we have the high percentage of voters during the gubernatorial or presidential elections, but yet our local elections right now, we're going to have 3 different commissioners who have everything to do with us, and it's right in our backyard. We're constantly tweeting at people to inform them about getting out and voting. So those are the things happening. We just want to be more involved in the community and make sure that everybody gets out to vote. At the end of the day, everything relies on your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Maricel. Perfect. Thank you, all of our speakers. Excellent and timely information. So a couple of quick announcements, and then we have a good 15 minutes for further discussion. One, everyone can check out the Event Titans site that our conference program is on. It's really comprehensive. You can get information about speakers, about sponsors, about other programs. Also on there at the end of our session, if you would please click the rate button. Underneath the session, it has a rate tab that you can give feedback about our session. And also, all of you are registered for the whole conference. The next session, there'll be a Lifetime Achievement Award to the County Administrator of Broward County, as well as panels this afternoon. So, you know, it was raised that there is a pending lawsuit over last year's law over election administration that hovers over a lot of this discussion. And so people can look that up and see where that stands. So at this point, I want to open it up, and, you know, the speakers will answer to the best of their ability of what they're able to you know, share with you right now. Giselle, would you like to ask a question that you had in the chat? Giselle?
Hi, everybody. My name is Hazel. It's pronounced like hey, the greeting, and a cell in your body. I'm an undergraduate at FIU. I'm currently working on my Bachelor of Public Policy and Service, and a Bachelor in Political Science, as well as the Public Policy Studies certificate. My question was about all of the threats to voting rights coming up in state legislatures across the country, and really to both of the supervisors of elections, if they're worried about the threats, or rather, how is Dade County prepared for it?
Well, I will say this, 2020 was revered as a very successful elections by all accounts. In Miami-Dade, in Broward, throughout the state of Florida, elected officials at all levels, national media attention that, you know, once again, Florida got it right. And so, you know, speaking for myself, and I think many supervisors of elections throughout the state, we were taken off guard when there was Senate Bill 90, election reform bill. Why is this necessary, right? We did everything under the law correctly. Voters were happy with not necessarily the outcome in all cases, but in the conduct of the election, right? And so we were surprised. Are there certain provisions in Senate Bill 90 that I'm against? Yes. Are there certain things in this new bill that's circulating now that I also don't like? Yes. But as elections administrators, our job is to administer the law, right? The way that our government works is that the legislators pass the laws. We have to administer them, under those protocols. So we do our best to communicate to our legislators to say, this is why this is a good idea. This is why this is a bad idea. In some cases, I would hope that they would listen to us a little bit more than what they do. But we have to make the best under the circumstances. In my opinion, when I am deciding whether or not I like a particular law, I think about it from two perspectives. From the voter's perspective, is this making it easier for them? Is it more convenient or not? And how am I going to be able to administer it? With the size of the county that we have, with the very, very tight deadlines that we have under Florida law, tighter than any other state in the nation in terms of timelines, can I administer it? And so, there are situations where, I'm finding that it's difficult, but we'll continue to press upon these thoughts onto our legislators and hope that, they listen to us and that we have a voice in the process.
Supervisor Scott, could you add on to that? Yeah.
For many of us in the elections world, it's very frustrating to see lawmakers that appear to be driven by ideological reasons for changing election laws. When we try very hard, as I described earlier, to make this a very professional and nonpartisan undertaking when it comes to counting the votes. So passing election bills, and especially passing them in an election year, is very difficult for us to deal with. And also when they pass election bills without talking to the professionals and without getting our opinions on how things go. As Christina said, it's, at the end of the day, we will always comply with the law, and whatever our legislators, our elected representatives who make the laws, they vote and they pass a law, it becomes law, the governor signs it, and when we salute, drive on, we execute. But it would be great if they took the time to consult with elections officials on those laws. And that's the problem now, is that we have lawmakers who don't feel like our opinions and our desires should be taken into consideration. They're being driven by conspiracy theories and false information that is mostly partisan ideological information that they are receiving that's not necessarily based in reality. So as far as how do we deal with that, that we do what we do. We continue to discuss that with the public as much as we can, and make sure that the public knows that we don't agree with what they're doing, if we don't, and agree if we do agree. Unfortunately, mostly it's been on the disagreement side because of the nature of the laws that have been getting passed. But that's all we really can do. And then once the law is passed and once it becomes law, we have to implement it and we have to comply with it.
Thank you. Good question, Hazel. I don't know if Howard or Marisol wants to weigh in on that. And then we're going to have Julio ask his question.
I'd like, if I may, pivot into, Hazel asked a question in the chat, specifically talking about whether he thinks we'll ever have safe online voting. And he mentioned something about using a mobile phone app, perhaps, that could update a voter's location. Online voting, I think, I want to defer to Christina and Joe on this, but in a perfect world, I can envision a world where people register their domain address with an elections department, and then they vote from home. And it has to come back from that specific IP address. That probably would take a lot of work to implement, but it may be something that eventually could be done. As far as Hazel's question about a mobile phone app that would update location based upon where a phone is, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that because I see how much fraud there is in location stuff with phones. And I would just be concerned that somebody could drive by, go to any location that they want and say, okay, here's where I'm voting from, just, being in front of a residence that's not their own residence. So I don't know that that would necessarily be very safe.
Oh, excuse me, if I could just clarify, I should have phrased it better. I meant like, how far are we from a safe voting system? And then what can we do about like a mobile phone app that sends you updated information on like where you are, not voting through the app, but it's like, oh, this is where you are, this is your upcoming elections, things like that.
So,
The other-
Hazel,
Go ahead.
no, go ahead, Howard.
No, so in other words, somebody who lives in the city of North Miami, for example, would be able to get something targeted to them from the elections department saying, okay, North Miami resident, you have your municipal election in 2 months from now. Here's who the candidates are. I think something like that would be great. Something like that could also be used campaigns to target voters as well. They would, I envision that they would then buy the lists of people from the Department of Elections, and then they would, somehow be able to target these people and send targeted mailings to them, not just hard mailings, but digital ads, which is what they do anyhow. This would be another avenue for them to do that.
I think-
Definitely. Hazel, those are a great question, and hopefully with the younger generation coming up, that may happen. But there are organizations that are working and sending reminders to voters. The League of Women Voters, we actually do a texting campaign according to the zip code. And we purchased, like Mr. Rosen said, the Voter Activation Network, and target, hey, City of Surfside constituent, you have an election coming up. Go to our voter platform and find out who your candidates are. But I'll tell you this much, in terms of technology, we are seeing so many things to suppress votes or change votes as it is. So we are actually hoping, or we've tried for years to get opt out of having voter registration automatically. So that's not happening. We would like that, hey, if you go to your driver's license, yes, you can sign up to register to vote. We would rather have it as opt out, so that you're automatically registered to vote, and that would be different. The way that the things are trending, and pretty much like SOE Scott said, it's more towards limiting the access to vote and making it more difficult versus making them more open. I put in the chat about the what was mentioned before about the office of fraud that is intended to do. We're really concerned about this because it's actually going to be like they're going to have policing power, and we're not comfortable with police officers at election sites. Last year we saw at Government Center some police officers monitoring the elections precinct there, and it's not really comfortable, especially with people that have history of their votes being suppressed. So this is very concerning, and this is going on in the legislature right now.
There's a good and tough question from Terry Murphy in the chat, but I want Julio to ask his question or comment, and then maybe we can go around with last comments from our panelists, please.
Thanks again, everyone. So it's Julio again. So getting back to, trying to get the word out and the information, because it really seems like that is at the crux of letting everybody know, what's really going on behind the scenes. And I understand that the biggest challenge is probably competing against, the political campaigns and all the other misinformation that gets out there. It's hard to do that. Those of us that work in the public sector, have done budgeting or been involved in the budgeting process of the public sector, know that IT is one of the most difficult positions to fill because can't compete against the private sector and what, the salaries that they're paid. So I'm just curious, with, the information and the IT age and everything moving so fast, is that a challenge? Has that been part of the challenge in keeping up with that misinformation? So in other words, is being able to hire, a mass media campaign or IT professionals part of the challenge in combating some of that misinformation and political campaign information when trying to get the word out?
Great question. So again, I'm watching the clock. I'd love to do this all day, but I think we could go to Christina, Joe, Howard, and Marisol to give their last comments on everything. Terry, if you wouldn't mind muting as well while we hear these last comments, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Well, I would certainly say sure to that, right? Not only are we elections administrators, but we've got to be cybersecurity experts and social media experts now too, and surround ourselves with people who know about all these things too, to just make sure that we are protecting ourselves and at the end of the day, protecting our voters so their confidence is upheld. So sure, but I think that, we've all adapted and we've done quite well with it. There's always room for improvement. The election cycle is here now. 2022 is here. It's hard to believe. Felt so far away at one point, and now we're here. And so we will continue to improve and thankfully funding has been coming down from the federal government, the state. The Board of County Commissioners here in Miami-Dade is very generous in providing the resources that I need to make sure that we're able to do what we have to do in a way that is ensuring that the election is held accurately.
Thank you. Supervisor Scott?
Yeah, so to close out, I definitely want to weigh in on the conversation about changing technology and the fact that we should be able to get to a place where we do have online voting. I think we have to keep up with as society is changing. I think we see a ton of innovation happening in the financial sector that's allowing people to do all of their banking without ever going into a branch, and it's done in a secure way, and people aren't without having to worry about hacking issues. A lot of what's holding us back from adopting more technology is the political environment and the culture of fear and disinformation that's out there. And I think because of that, it'll be a long time before we actually do implement some of those, some improvements that would be, very easy and secure to make it much easier for people to vote. So I would love to see that future come, but unfortunately, I think it's going to be a while. Not that the technology isn't there, just the political climate isn't right for it.
Thank you very much. Howard, final thoughts?
So there is a natural tension between increasing the number of voters, right, and getting out the voters and making it easier to vote, and that also creating new opportunities for fraud. Online voting would be amazing, like we all alluded to, but there are issues with it. Supervisor White will remember a few years ago, there was an investigation that we had where people were somehow electronically requesting, from a computer was generating electronic requests for absentee ballots. And I don't remember, it was hundreds of absentee ballots that were being requested from like 1 or 2 different IP addresses. So, bad actors out there, the more you're giving opportunity to make it easier for people, there are bad actors looking for ways to, take advantage of that. So, we have to make these things happen, but we do have to do them, cautiously. Because, again, voting is extremely important and we have to protect every single vote. So thank you for putting this all together, Professor Thorne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosen. Appreciate your participation. And I'm going to share what you shared with me, that you're going to be retiring soon from the state attorney's office. And we really wish you well and thank you for all the service over the decades in that office.
Thank you.
Marisol.
Yes, Terry, to your question. So all of us third-party voter registration organizations, we have to write in our third-party voter registration number at the back of the form. So I'm pretty sure that the state attorney is looking into that. because that's part of submitting the form. But in closing, thank you so much. And what I want to say, thank you to supervisors of elections and everyone here. But most of all, stay involved in your community, stay engaged, don't give up. Make sure your voter registration card is filled correctly and updated. Make sure your families are too. Find organizations that are reputable and that you can rely on and trust in them. Thank you.
Again, thank you, everyone. We all have in common, I believe, that we all want to see fair, safe, transparent election administration. I really do thank our supervisors of elections for being here and spending their time with us, but I also thank them for the work they've done. Truly, I believe they've been successful in their positions and tough tasks in this environment. So we all truly appreciate you, and we appreciate you sharing information, having open doors for our community.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. You all have a great day.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Our breakout session is going to close. Stick around if you can. Otherwise, have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.